Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to RATPAC. My name is Anthony Luscre, Kilo 8 Zulu Tango, and tonight's topic is making CW radio contacts or expanding your modes of operation. My contact information on my website. Today's slideshow has a number of links in it, so you're going to want those links. You can go to the slideshow at tiny.cc/CWQSO, or you can shoot the QR code, and I'll have that available at the end of the slideshow also. Anytime you see this font or this symbol, that means there's a link that you can click on for more information in today's slideshow. The purpose of the slideshow is to help hams new to CW get on there, make contacts, and learn the options that they have. Some of the topics we'll talk about is why would you use CW? What type of allocations do you have with different licenses for the CW bands? What do you need? How do you find potential contacts? What to say? And some techniques. This is very similar to the talk I did a couple months ago on getting started with HF single sideband. So many of us got into ham radio for the lure of talking with hams in faraway and exotic sounding places around the world. To do this magic directly without wires, satellites, or the internet, we need high-frequency radio bands with their worldwide propagation. So if we look at the HF allocations for the amateur bands in the United States, you'll see the red indicates the spots that CW is available. Now, let me fill you in on another secret. CW can be used anywhere on any of the bands. These are the suggested areas. So unlike the fact that you can't operate phone at the bottom of the band, you can operate CW anywhere. But the place you're most likely to do that is in the areas that are designated for CW. You'll also notice on this chart that there are allocations on 4 bands for technician class operators on HF in CW, and they're shown by these little jiggly, squiggly lines, and the 4th one is in the 10 meters. So these are CW only for those particular ones. The other ones are CW and RIDI and data. So the effect of the license allocation system in the US on the HF bands. With a tech license, HF contacts are limited to single sideband and digital, such as FT8 and FT4, only on 10 meters. 10 meter activity, unfortunately, is very dependent on the sunspot cycle. We're in a good spot right now, but in 3 or 4 years, sunspot activity will die down. Those bands will not be that active. But technicians do have privileges. They're sort of inherited privileges from the old novice days of CW allocations on 80, 40, 15, and 10 meters. General class licensees, on the other hand, have opportunities on all the HF bands, with a few exceptions in certain frequencies that they can't use. Extra class license will give you all of the spots. So here's the difference between the extra class and the general class. This is the general class band allocations. You'll see that there are some donut holes on CW and on phone on 15, 20, 40, and 80. So general class do not have all the full privileges. So the bottom line is, if you need a general license if you want to operate CW on all bands. You need an extra class if you want to fill in those missing donut holes. Also, if you're a tech, CW can give you 4 additional HF bands. Another reason why you might want to consider CW is you have a better chance of making contacts with weak signals, low power, poor antennas, etc. than you do using single sideband. The signal to noise ratio will allow you to make a contact on CW when the conditions are not good enough to make one on phone. CW is very popular and effective for contesting and DXing. And I love the DX, so I don't want to miss any mode or band when there's a possibility of working a new station. Another thing, especially for youngsters, no one knows your age, your accent, your stutter, your gender, etc. on CW. They just hear CW. It's great for POTA and other portable operations. The equipment is simpler and less expensive. In some cases, you can always use expensive equipment on CW also. Many operators get great satisfaction from learning and using code. The youth find it very interesting. I've seen this a number of times when I'm working with school-aged children. They find the code interesting. It's like something secret that no one else knows. And many operators enjoy using it. You can see the big smile here on Jim's face. So if you do not already know CW and want to learn or get better if you already do know CW, I'm going to give you a couple tips and a couple places to go for information. First, there's just some general tips. There's so many different ways to learn and so many different things you can read about learning CW, but I just want to mention a couple things that are pretty well accepted. The first one is you do not want to learn to count the dots, also known as dits, or the dashes, also known as DAWs. It will just slow you down. You'll be able to use it at very slow speeds, but once the speeds start getting up to typical amateur radio band speeds, your brain won't have time to count and decode. So it's suggested that you learn at a minimum of 10 words a minute, and actually probably a little bit higher, so you're hearing sounds, not counting the elements. Each letter, each number should sound like a single sound that you're hearing. Just like a word sounds like a sound, you're not hearing the individual letters in it. The Farnsworth method is a way that we can speed up the elements that are being sent and increase the spacing between each letter so that your brain has more processing time. But what we're not doing is we're not slowing down the code speed so you can copy the individual DAWs and DITs. There's a couple different ways for learning CW that have been popular over the years. Many years ago, you could use recorded CW lessons, and originally these were on long play albums, on vinyl albums. You could buy a vinyl album and learn the code. Then there was cassette tapes. Then there was CDs and other ways that you could have recorded CW. I'd suggest you avoid all recorded CW lessons, because what will happen is you will memorize things based on hearing them over and over again without really absorbing the code so much as memorizing the order of what's on the recording. The nice thing about all the more modern ways of teaching is that we have the ability to send infinite variety and order of characters using software or apps. So I would suggest, instead of using recorded CW lessons, CW training using either computer software or apps where the information can be generated randomly and you won't learn what's there, you'll be learning the characters themselves. Also, if it's possible, I'd suggest an in-person class. Now, there's not a lot of these going on and it might not be convenient for you to go one. Fortunately, there's 2 excellent online CW training classes where you'll be working with other people. And we've had both of these groups on RATPAC in the past. They are the Long Island CW Club. And you can join the club and you can take lessons. They have many, many lessons during the week. The way the Long Island Club works is they have beginners classes scheduled throughout the week at different times of day, different days of the week. So whatever your schedule matches, you can go to them. And they use what's called a carousel method. So on any given week, all of the beginners classes are teaching the same characters. So if you can't make the Thursday class this week, you can go to the Friday class or the Wednesday class or the Sunday class. Any class during that week will be teaching the same characters. Also, that means that you don't have to wait to start. The first day you start, you just jump in. You're going to learn 3 new characters. The same 3, the same 3 characters that are being taught in all the beginners classes that year. So there's no time where you have to wait until they start the alphabet again. So this link will take you out to the Long Island CW Club site. You can take a look at the classes. If you go to the calendar and take a look at the class calendar, you'll see that it's packed with classes on learning CW, beginners level, intermediate level, advanced level. Plus they also have a lot of other activities such as antenna forms, boat anchor form, etc., etc. I also do a class for them on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. called The Joy of Operating. There's a video here that they did for the RATPAC group. You can click on that video and watch the video. The second group is the CW Academy sponsored by the CW Ops group. It has classes in a little different format. You sign up for an individual class and you have the same instructor and same students with you each week, and you work with them during the week. They also do an excellent job, and there's a video from them at the RATPAC. So I would suggest you take a look at either or both of these groups. There's nothing that says you can't do both, and find out information on learning code. It's really would give you a lot more support than just using the software on your own, and by having other people, it will help drive you to continue working on the process. Also, both of these groups are really big on not just learning the code, learning the characters, but actually using the code to make contacts. So they will help you get on the air and start making contacts as soon as you learn your letters. I have a presentation that has more information on called Having Fun with Morse. It talks a lot more about things that I'm not going to have enough time to cover tonight, but you can go to that. There's also a video on the RATPAC site for this. The link to the slideshow has the link to the video in it also, so you can play the video. So let's move on now and say that you've learned CW, or you're going to go out and learn CW. Let's talk about what's involved with making contacts on CW. So this slide is very similar to my slide I had for the single sideband. We need an HF radio, either a multi-band radio, single band radio, quad band radio, but we need an HF radio. In this case, it only has to be capable of CW. So we can pick a CW-only radio like this little QRP Labs $55 or $65 kit that does a single band of CW, and it'll work just fine. It'll limit us to one band, but it will let us operate CW on that band. We need an antenna or antennas, some feed line to connect our radio to our antenna, and we need an input device. Now this input device is going to be a way of sending CW on the radio. And you might think, well, that's simple, just like talking in the microphone. There's really only one way to do it. Well, there's a number of ways you can have your radio put out a CW signal. So we'll go through those in a moment. So let's look at some of these. So first of all, we need a device that we touch with our hand. This is the device that's going to initiate the code. And the simplest device is what is called a stray key. It's basically an on-off switch. You might have seen these if you're not familiar with amateur radio. If you've ever seen a movie with telegraph, they have a key like this. And basically, when you push down on it, it closes the circuit. That causes the radio to be keyed. That causes CW to be sent. Now, the speed that you can go with this is somewhat limited because it gets difficult at higher speeds, and also you can get fatigue in your arm. So even before the advent of radio, telegraphers developed what are called semi-automatic keys or bugs. This is an example of a mechanical key, but it is semi-automatic. It uses a system of levers and springs and weights to auto-complete some of the characters and make characters. That's another way to send CW. The next ones I'm going to talk about all require some sort of some sort of electronic interface to be able to send the information. Now that may be built into the radio. You might have a built-in keyer, but these first two do not require any type of keyer to go along with your key. They can key the radio directly and cause the CW to be made. So we can use paddles. Now you'll hear these paddles referred to by a bunch of terms. Some people might refer to them as iambic paddles. That's actually a style of keying that when we're using paddles, they're not really iambic paddles, but they can be used for iambic sending. That's a fine definition, but let's just stick with the fact that we're going to call them paddles. And there are really three types of paddles. Dual paddles, where you use one paddle. When you press it, it sends a da. When you press the other paddle, it sends a dit. Now, how does it do it? It has to be interfaced with that electronic keying device, whether it's in your radio or it's external. It can't actually create those characters on its own. It is simply two switches. Just like we had one switch here, we now have two switches, and they're activated by pressing on one paddle or the other paddle. But we need a device that can interpret those presses and convert them into Morse code. We'll talk about that later. We could also have a single paddle. In this case, we push it to the left or to the right. So it's very similar to the other paddle, but it works a little bit differently. Sometimes you'll hear these referred to as slapping keys. We also have a third type of paddle here. This can either be a single or dual, but it is not a paddle that moves. It is a paddle that has a high capacitance and it detects your finger. So it is a touch sensitive or touch paddle. When you touch it, it doesn't move. It simply senses your finger and it keys the close the circuit just like any of these other two would. You can also use a computer keyboard, and I'll talk about how you can use that. And you could actually go and use your computer to do all the keying, and this would be from a program such as a logging program or a contesting program, and you need to use a keying interface, and we'll talk about that. Now, the last way that you can actually input the information is by sending a command to your radio. Some radios, such as the Luscre and the Kenwoods, have a set of commands that you can send, and when you send a command, it'll trigger it to send a letter in the computer. So you're not actually keying anything, you're telling it, the radio, to key itself. So with the paddles, all three of these different type of paddles, we need some sort of keying device, and these are called keyers. An electronic keyer can either be built into your radio, or it can be an external device like these four pictured on this page. This is a very simple keyer. It's got two memories to it. You can hook up a set of paddles to this, and then it has an output that keys your radio. So whenever you touch the one side of the paddle, it creates a dial. Whenever you press the other side, it creates a dit, and that's the way it works. And this can be as simple as a $19 kit that you can buy. Here's another example. This is called the MFJ memory keyer. MFJ has a whole variety of keyers that they were selling. You'll find them on the used market. This has 4 memories to it, and it has some other functions. It has a speed control and a volume control because it has a side tone in it. And again, you hook up your paddles to this, and it sends the information from there to your radio. Another one called Ham Gadgets. This is no longer being produced, but I have one of these sitting right in front of me, and I really like it a lot. This Funtronics one, you can pick these up for as low as $75 shipped. If you're shopping for one of these and you see it for $90 or $115, go to the Ellie Kits parts. See that right on there, Ellie Kits parts, and you can pick that up. Now, this is an example of one of many, many keyers that are based on the K3NG circuit. Anthony Good, K3NG, designed a keyer using an Arduino and a few extra components. And he has the information on his website. You can make one yourself, or you can go out and buy a kit, or you can buy a pre-assembled one. They're all using Anthony's software, though. So it's the K3NG keyer, and there's a wide variety of features built into it, and you can find them both as kits. You can do your own, or you can find a pre-assembled unit. Now, some of these, in addition to hooking up paddles, you can also hook up a keyboard. So this one and this one both allow you to plug in a USB keyboard and simply strike a key on the keyboard, and it will send that character. So if you're a good touch typist and you want to go that route, you don't need to use paddles. A lot of people enjoy using paddles. They like the feeling that it gives you, but if you just want to be able to key it with a keyboard, you can do that too. And I had a friend who was developing very bad arthritis and was having trouble with any of these types of devices, and he finally realized that he was able to use a keyboard pretty effectively, and that's what he's using now. Now, I mentioned earlier that you can let your software do the keying if it has the ability to send the signals, and these are some examples of do-it-yourself RS-232 keying interfaces. By the way, these worked wonderfully with DOS-based computers. Your performance may be mixed on a Windows-based computer because of the fact that it's multitasking all the time. So these may or may not work well with the Windows-based computer, but I can guarantee they'll work fine with DOS. And I have an old DOS 3.2 computer sitting here, or 5.1 if I wanted to use that. This is the circuit I prefer most of the time. It's a simple circuit with an opto-isolator. It actually is a dual opto-isolator, but you don't use both of them because you don't need both of them. But that's what I had around. And you simply hook up this also opto-isolator using a diode and a resistor, and then you feed the TR and the DTR, the CTS, and the ground pins on a serial input. Now you can use a USB to serial adapter to connect to that, and then it simply sends the information out. The opto-isolator means that you won't have voltages going between the radio and the computer interface, but there's a bunch of them. So here's another one using an opto-isolator, very similar to this one. Here's one using a transistor, a diode, and 2 resistors. Here's another one using 2 diodes and a transistor. All of these will work just fine, but your performance may vary depending on your computer with Windows multitasking. So how do we get around that problem with Windows? Well, they came out with something called the WinKeyer. And the WinKeyer basically, when you're using a program like N1MM or another program that sends the information, instead of sending it to the interface, it sends it to the WinKeyer. it doesn't actually key the device. Like here, the computer's actually keying the device and sending the signal out. Here, we're sending a signal to the Win keyer, telling it to make the letter and then send it on as by closing the switch, just like if it was a straight key. You can buy a Win keyer that you can plug paddles into, and it has 4 memories, speed adjustment. But if you just want one and you're not going to hook it up, you just want to use it to send from your N1MM or other logging software, the Win keyer Mini simply hooks up with a USB cable to your computer. It has an output that goes to your radio. You can hook a paddle up if you want to, but there's no speed control or anything like that. And this is about $65. This is something called the MoRidi. It's designed originally as a RIDI interface. This is version 2 of the MoRidi. And the MoRidi also has the ability to do Win key emulation. So you can buy this device and it will act as a keyer with Win keyer emulation. So any program that's set up to use a Win keyer can also use any device that has Win keyer emulation built in. And you'll find a lot of keyers do have Win keyer emulation built in. And they have a USB cable to connect to your computer, so take a look at those. And as I mentioned earlier, you can also send software commands directly to the radio across the CAT interface. You don't need any other type of device. But that's only if the radio supports it. So we have a bunch of devices we can connect. We have a bunch of different ways we can do it. Let's talk about all the options. And I really counted 10 different keying input options. You can connect your key directly to the radio using a stray key or a semi-automatic bug. Again, nothing else required. Even if your radio doesn't have a built-in keyer, it doesn't need one. All it needs is a jack to key the radio. You can connect it directly to the radio with a built-in keyer. So if that's the case, you can hook up a set of paddles directly to the radio and use your built-in keyer in your radio. And a lot of modern radios have built-in keyers. So you wouldn't need anything else other than the paddles. You can connect it directly to the radio with a built-in keyboard. Some radios have the ability to plug in a keyboard. For example, the Tentec Jupiter, the ICOM 7610. You can simply plug a keyboard in, and they have the ability to interpret the signals from the keyboard and send it out as CW. You can connect it to the radio via an external keyer. So we showed you a number of different keyers. Any of those will work with paddles, single, dual, or touch paddles. And many keyers also allow the use of stray keys. So you can hook up a stray key. It won't have all the same features, but you can hook it up, and that way you only have one device. You can switch between a stray key and a set of paddles. And that's what I basically have here. I'm using the Ham Gadgets keyer. It has one spot to plug in my key and one spot to plug in my paddles. The last way is to connect it via electronic keyer that has keyboard capability built into it, and you'd hook up a keyboard. You can also do it with a homebrew RS-232 interface, a Win keyer interface, other interfaces with Win keyer emulation. You can send commands to the radio, as we talked about earlier, if your radio supports that. And in addition, if you want to use more than one device, you can put a splitter before it gets to the radio. So you could have a keyer, you could have a paddle, you could have a bug, you could have a keyboard, you could have all these hooked up and just use a splitter, so that what happens is eventually all of them go to the radio. What you want in that case is you want to make sure that your radio is set up properly to work. If you're hooking a paddle directly up to your radio and it has a built-in keyer, you need to make sure it's set to use the keyer. But if you're hooking up a stray key, an external keyer, a bug, you need to go in and set your radio so that it thinks that it's using a stray key. So it knows it. Some auto sense, some don't. So you might need to make some settings in your radio. So basically, make sure your radio keying menu is set properly. For both the stray key and external keyer, set it to stray key mode. For directly connecting paddles, set it to the correct keyer mode. And you'll find that there's a couple different modes. There's mode A, there's mode B, and these have to do with self-completing of characters, a little beyond what we're going to talk about tonight, but there's different modes that you can key with. Couple other keying tips. Whatever you're using On any modern radio, now there are some exceptions with older radios that use different types of connections for the keys, but on most modern radios, they're either going to use a 1/4 inch, a 1/8, also known as a 3.5 millimeter jack on the radio. The plug that you use to connect it on your cable from your keyer, etc. should always be a stereo. Do not use a mono plug because it will short out the settings. Even if you're using a straight key, which only has 2 connections, you might think I can get away with that, but no, the radio is designed to receive a stereo plug. So in any case, always use a stereo plug for your device that you're plugging into your radio. Use high quality USB cables if you need to use a cable that you're hooking to an RS-232 interface. Use ferrite suppressors. If you're using an adapter cable between USB and serial, get one that has an FTDI chip in it and not prolific drivers. You'll save yourself a lot of headaches. So these are just some tips for actually connecting. And also use good quality audio cables. A couple weeks ago we were doing winter field day at our local club station, and I was trying to we were operating phone mostly, but I wanted to demonstrate some CW, and I got everything set up and I had everything ready to go, and I wasn't getting the radio wasn't keying, and it turned out that the audio cable between the two was bad. And I cut it in half and I tested both halves, and I found out which half was bad, and I threw away that half and I put a plug on the end of the good half and kept that cable, but it had a bad connection somewhere in it. As far as the other components, the radio, the antennas that I mentioned earlier, I have 2 presentations, one on buying amateur radio equipment and one called 10 Worst Antennas. Again, you can watch the video for both of these on the RATPAC site. Let's talk a little bit about the actual operations. You got everything set up, you know the code, you got your radio ready to go. What is different about speaking in code and speaking in voice? Well, first of all, Morse code is going to use a lot more abbreviations and shortcuts. One of the shortcuts is Q codes. Now you can use a Q code on phone. You can say QTH for your location. You can do all these, but they're really designed for CW and for the shortness of saying it. The Q codes will all be 3-letter abbreviations that start with the letter Q and don't have a U. There are actually hundreds of Q codes. Amateurs only use about 10, and this list has probably about 40 in it. Some of these I have never used. Like QRJ, I've never used QRJ. I've never heard anyone use QRJ. I would say the most common ones that you hear will be QRL, is this frequency in use, QRM for man-made interference, QRN for natural interference such as static, QRO meaning high power, QRP for low power, QRQ for sending faster, and one of the most important ones you need to learn as a new CW operator is QRS. That means please send slower, and stations will accommodate you and send slower. So if you're having trouble copying someone, send a PLS QRS, please send slower, and they will be happy to do that. QRT means to stop sending or go off the air, QRX standby, QSB, QSL. So some of these you're going to probably be familiar with, probably not familiar with QSP for please relay, or QSV, so I send the set of V's. So some of these are not that common. The second thing is something called prosigns. And prosigns are one or more letters combined together to send a more important piece of information, a more detailed piece of information. So we all know CQ. CQ is a general way of calling other stations. So it's an example of a prosign. R stands for Roger. It means affirmative. It means you received the information perfectly. Do not send it if you didn't copy it. Some of these are more commonly used than others. AS is not a real common one, but when you send these, when they have a underline on them, that means you send it all as one character. So you don't send AS, you send did. You send the 2 characters as one character. BT for break, AR for end of message. SK is used like AR but at the very last transmission, and BK can also be sent for break. K for go ahead, KN for only one station go ahead, and CL for shutting down the station, also known as see you later. But These are the pro signs. Sometimes they're very important to use, other times you don't really need to use them. There's a couple that you're going to use all the time. There are also a number of abbreviations, and there's a lot of them, and most of them are pretty common sense, but some of them are sort of strange if you're not familiar with CW. And some of them are not even on this list. Well, it is on the list. So here's a very common one that you'll hear, ES. ES is the abbreviation for end. Why would you do that? Why would you have an abbreviation for a word as short as end? Well, it's dit. So it is a very short series of one dit and then three dits, as opposed to doing dit-ah, da-dit, da-dit-dit. So it's just shorter to do it. You'll also see people send FER when they mean for, F-O-U-R, a little bit shorter. The E is a shorter character than the O. FB for fine business, good morning, good night, etc. Very similar. If you do texting, you probably use abbreviations. Well, the good news is the abbreviations are much more standardized than amateur radio because they've been being used for over 100 years. So learn some of the abbreviations, but don't overdo it to the point of confusing someone else. So those are available on this link. I have another link here that has some more. That's the same one. This is the one that's different. This is from the Southwest DX Association. It also talks about cut numbers, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes. So you can actually abbreviate a number by using a letter. The ones that are most commonly used is the letter A for 1, the letter N for 9, and the letter T for 0. The other ones are not commonly used, although I'm seeing more and more people use the E for 5. So instead of sending 599, they'll send ENN. Here's a AWL quick reference guide to operations. This talks about the most commonly used ones. It also talks about more information on the RST system and other things. Again, as you start using CW, you'll start seeing a lot of abbreviations. You'll see a lot of Q codes used. And if you learn to use them effectively, it can save you a lot of time. Plus, if you understand them, it'll make you understand things a lot better. So you're going to want to learn some of these. So let's make a contact. And this is this very similar slide that I use for phone, but basically you need to first find a station you want to make contact with, tune them in, initiate the contact, what are you going to say, and then end the contact. So we'll talk about all 5 of these. There's 2 main ways to get a station. One is to call CQ, and this is also known as running in contest operations because you keep calling CQ over and over again. As soon as you finish one station, you call CQ for the next one. The second method is to answer a CQ. This is also known as search and pounce or hunt and pounce, and most newer CW operators are going to tend to answer CQs. Why? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, when you're answering the CQ, you have plenty of time to figure out what the call sign of the station you're talking to is before you even answer them. So you already got that part down. Also, if you call CQ, you might end up with 10 stations coming back to you. And if you're not real comfortable with CW, one station might be difficult, but 10 stations is even more difficult. So I would suggest when you're starting out, you might want to stick more to answering CQs than calling CQs. Although that doesn't mean you can't do it. I would just not do it in a really busy place calling CQ. So in the middle of a big contest, it can be very difficult to deal with all the response you get. So tuning is very important. And you want to first find a band, then tune in and listen for CQing stations if you want to search and pounce. You can also look on DX clusters to find a station and then tune specific to that frequencies. So if I take a look at the DX cluster right now, I can see that, let's see, what do we got here? Here's NR4A operating CW at 14.026, so I could tune there. Here's another station operating on 15 meters, HR5 FD. Here's a station in Thailand, HS0 at 28.34. So by using a DX cluster, I can find things. Now, one of the things that's very interesting, on your DX cluster and on your spotting clusters, with phone, someone has to put the information there. On CW, there's automated stations called the Reverse Beacon Network that are listening around the world. And anytime they hear a station call CQ or QRZ, they will take that information, decode it, and then post it to the reverse beacon network cluster. So the spotting on CW is a lot more efficient and a lot more prolific than it is on phone. Also, if you're going to call CQ or you're listening for stations, instead of tuning the whole band, start out where you're expecting to find stations. So if you're working a contest such as this last weekend, when you're working one of the state QSO party challenges, one of the state QSO parties, they had specific suggested frequencies, so that's where I was listening for the stations from those parties. You can also take part in an on-air net that meets at a regular time, or you can call CQ yourself. Choose a band that you have operating privileges on and make sure you stay within your license privileges. So just don't tune around when you find a station and respond to them. If you have a general class license, be aware of those donut holes I talked about earlier. If you have a technician class license, remember that you only have CW privileges on certain bands and you can only use CW. You can't use other digital modes there. Find a band that's likely to support what you want, the contact you want to make, and just like in single sideband, unlike FM, CW is not channelized. So everyone is not going to be lined up on the 0.0 or the 0.05. They could be anywhere. They might be at 28.0.123.467. You know, they could be anywhere. There's nothing that says they have to be exactly on a frequency. The first thing I would suggest is when you're tuning a station, you want to zero beat them. So in other words, you want to make sure that your signal when you transmit will line up exactly with where they're transmitting. Now they might not be listening there, we'll talk more about that later, but you want to start out with that as the goal. Now there's a couple ways to do this. A lot of radios have a built-in spotting function where you can turn on a tone. You're not actually transmitting the tone, but you're producing the same tone that you would be if you're transmitting, and then you can match that tone to the station you want to tune in, and that zero beats it. So other radios have automatic zero beat, so I can hit a button on my Elecraft K3 and it will automatically try and zero beat that station for me. And that button is so important for me during contesting that on my N1MM software, I have set up the F12 key so it sends a command to the radio telling it to push the spot button for me automatically so I don't have to take my hand off the keyboard. Problem with zero beating is sometimes the station transmitting is not listening on exactly that frequency. Why is that? Well, one, they may have some misalignment between their transmit and receive, but they might be doing it on purpose. They might like a signal that's a little bit higher in frequency or one that's a little bit lower in frequency, so they're actually listening a little bit above or below where they're transmitting. So the most important thing is to find out where they're answering stations and actually zero beat the station that was successful at contacting the station we're calling CQ. Now sometimes they even spread out further, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. You got to be aware of your footprint, just like you do on single sideband. Now on single sideband it was pretty huge because we had that whole extra sideband that we had to make sure we kept in the band. So on upper sideband we wanted to make sure we didn't go too close to the top of the band, and on lower sideband we wanted to make sure we didn't go too close to the bottom of the band so the extra sideband wouldn't go across into the outside of our privileges. Well, fortunately it's a lot narrow on CW, but I would still suggest you stay 150 hertz, not kilohertz, 150 hertz away from the band edges. That should keep your whole signal in, unless you really have a wide CW signal, and then you got other problems that you got to deal with. So if with a normally correctly operating radio, you should be perfectly safe with about 150 hertz. And you can play this little video that shows you information on. Well, let me just go ahead and play it. I think this is pretty short. I'm going to go ahead and play this.
In today's video, we're going to take a look at the occupied bandwidth of a CW, or Morse code.
But the main thing I want to mention is the speed of your signal also affects the width of your signal.
In today's video,
you can watch it. It's 11 minutes long. So these are the guidelines. If you're operating in 10 meters, don't go lower than 28.0015, and you should be pretty good. So when you are listening for CQs, make sure it's a CQ that wants you. In other words, if they're just calling CQ and nothing else, that means anyone can answer. But if they're calling CQ with a specific request, such as CQ DX, and you're not a DX station, don't answer. Same as you would on phone. CQ contest, if you're not in the contest or not interested in being in the contest, don't answer. If they call for a specific state, a specific call area, etc. Only answer if you match the criteria. Contesting stations will often end the previous contact and solicit a next contact simply by sending QRZ, not saying, but sending QRZ. So they might go TU QRZ. So they're not even calling CQ, but they're ready to work that next station immediately, so be ready for that. DX stations may work split, and what that means is they will tell you, they might say 1 up. That means that they're starting 1 kilohertz up from where they're at, and they're listening at that point. So don't work them on this frequency they're transmitting on, work them on the frequency that they've asked you to split. So you need to know how to set the split operation on your radio. Very important thing to learn with both phone and CW. You need to be able to understand how to operate split. Now, one of the big differences between DX stations operating split on CW versus phone is they tend to use a much narrower range. They won't say 5 to 15 up. They'll say 1 up, and that usually means if you tune up, you might find them, in the most extreme case, maybe 1 to 5 up, but they don't go much beyond that. Because the signals, you can fit a lot more signals, CW signals, in the same range as you can a phone signal. In pre-computing days, spotting was basically one ham letting fellow club members know by either phone calls or pagers or texting or announcing it on the local repeater, or you might find long-term spotting information in writing. There's in magazines, but there's also a number of DX bulletins that come out weekly telling you what bands and what frequency stations are operating on. So these can also help you to find where you're looking for stations. Here's a bunch of information on the DX clusters. I have links. You can click on each of these for more information, and it'll take you out and give you a lot more information. You can also find out what contests are available and be ready to operate those. You can find out which contests are coming up this weekend. There's the Russian DX contest. It's both CW and phone. And there's also one state QSO party. I think it's the Virginia state QSO party this week. In addition to these spotting networks, don't forget about the reverse beacon network. It can also help you out greatly. Now, CW, there's nets that operate in CW, but it's beyond the scope of today. Nets that operate in CW often use a little bit different set of procedures. They use different Q symbols, including the QN series of symbols. So I'm not going to really talk about nets tonight in this presentation, but just be aware that if you are operating in a net, you need to know what procedure they're using, what abbreviations they're using, how the person is running the net. They might only want the last 2 digits of your call sign. They might want something special. So if you're going to operate in a net, find out the specifics of the net you're operating in so you can operate properly. So we've now found a station, we've tuned them in, and we need to figure out where we're going to respond. I already talked about zero beating or calling slightly above or below, or if they're operating split, making sure you're in the range that they've requested. The next thing you need to figure out, just like you do on phone, is what's the station's preference? Who are they working? Because you want to imitate the stations that are being successful. So if he's only taking the people that call the fastest, make sure you call as fast as possible. If he's only taking the stations that wait a few seconds before they answer, wait a few seconds before you answer. If he's only answering people that give their call twice, give your call twice. If he's only answering stations that are slightly off frequency, either above or below, you want to park your transmitter there so that you're going to be in the same place. Is he only responding to certain types or locations of responders? He might be saying he only wants a certain call area, but he might also only be working a certain area. That might be because he has a beam, and the beam is maybe aimed in a direction away from you, and you might need to wait until he turns the beam toward you. Or are they working only special stations? In other words, is it a net or is it a contest, and they're only looking for people that are either in the contest or checking into the net? So you need to be aware of these things. When you do respond, match the speed of the calling station, or if they're going very fast that you're not comfortable with, answer at the speed that you're comfortable copying at. So again, if you're comfortable with the speed of the station that's sending, respond at the same speed. Don't respond faster. If you're not comfortable with the speed they're sending, but you've already copied them, send a little bit slower, and they will typically slow down to match your speed. Just like getting on a highway, timing is really important. Knowing when to jump in, how fast to jump in, etc. is very important. I have a whole presentation on this called Get in the Rhythm, Know the Rhyme, and Dance the Dance. You can see the slideshow. You can watch the video on that for more information. Okay, so now they answered you. What do you do next? Well, it depends on a lot of things. The first thing that's important is that they get your call correct. If they didn't get your call correct, we're going to need to deal with that first. But if they did get your call correct, the next thing you want to know is, what did they say? Did they give you just a signal report and they were done? Did they give you a signal report and a name? Did they give you a signal report, a name, and a QTH? Did they give you a signal report and a QTH only? So whatever they gave you, just give them the same thing back. Also, listen for a while, see what the discussion is between the stations, and then you can match that. So again, first, if they did not get your call correct or they're not sure, and they ask you for a repeat, give your call correct twice. Not 15 times, not 20 times, twice should be enough. Sometimes maybe 3 if they're really having problems, maybe there's bad fading. Here's probably the most important thing you will learn tonight, hopefully. If they come back with your call correct in the form of a question, so if someone sends me K8ZT question mark, that means they're asking me, is your call K8ZT? The worst thing I can possibly do is send K8ZT back to them, because that's not what they were asking. They were asking if my call was correct. If it's correct, simply give them an R or 2 Rs or a QSL. I like an RR. That tells them that they had it correct, and we're done. We've solved the problem. They have the call correct. We're done. If they send my call with a question mark and I send my call again, they're going to assume that they must have made a mistake. So don't repeat. Confirm if it's correct. If they're still not getting your call, let them know with a negative or no, and then repeat your call a couple times. Hopefully they'll get it right. So the next thing is, what type of contact is it? That's going to determine what you're going to say and do. So I've broken it down to 5 different categories. The first one is a short exchange of call sign and signal report. This is mainly with DXing, special events, etc. They have 1 million people to work. They just want your signal report. And by the way, I'm going to tell you right now, if it's a DX station, you might be able to give a different signal report, but it really doesn't matter. They're probably going to put a 599 in their log and 599 in their log and continue. So you might as well send them a 599 if it's really busy. If it's a contest exchange, I'm going to tell you you're not allowed to send anything else other than a 5NN. Okay? You can send anything else you want, but they're going to ignore it, and it's just going to slow things down. The other thing you need to know, if it's a contest, you need to know what the exchange is before you respond. How do you find that out? Well, you look on the calendar and find out, or you listen to what they're giving the other stations are giving them. So let's say maybe it's a fixed exchange, like your name or your state or your CQ zone or your ITU zone or your POTA number or whatever it is. That's fine. It's going to be the same for everyone. But maybe it's a changing exchange, like a serial number. So the first station I contact, I'm going to give them a 1. The second station, I'm going to give them a 2. And the second, I'm going to give them a 3, and so forth. So if you hear a station that you want to work in a contest and the exchange is a fixed exchange, make sure you know what the proper fixed exchange is for you and your location. If it's a serial number that everyone's giving them, give them a 1 if you've made no more contacts in that contest. And let's say you only want to work this one rare DX station and he's in the contest, send them your 1, you're done, you're done. But let's say later on you hear another station you want to work in that contest, well, send them a 2, and so forth and so forth. Now, if you're really working the contest, trying to score in the contest, you're probably using contest logging software, and it'll take care of keeping track of that for you. The next type of contact is a typical short QSO. This is what I call a call sign, signal report, name, QTH, etc. Maybe a radio, maybe an antenna, and go on. Maybe 2 or 3 exchanges back and forth. It's not a long rag queue. It's maybe a couple minutes at the most. When does this happen? A lot of times this happens when the station has limited English language capability. They're not going to carry on a long conversation, but they know how to tell you the information that they want to, and they'll be able to copy your simple information there. Number 4 is a longer QSO. Now, a lot of times a number 3 contact turns into a number 4 contact. Maybe you send them the fact that you're using a certain rig and they have that rig, or they had that rig before. Maybe they're intrigued in the type of antenna you have, or maybe they're interested in the city you live in. And that takes a short, typical QSO like number 3 and makes it into a longer QSO, a RAGQ. The 5th type of contact is a special contact. This is something like a net, a POTA operation, a special event station, and it's going to be anything imaginable. Just follow what everyone else is doing. So let's look at some examples. Here's a number 1 short exchange. CQ, CQ, R1AB, W5LZ, W5LZ, 5NN, Roger, 5NN, and maybe you send them your state. It's up to you. Don't put the parentheses around it, but send the state. Now, what did I not do in this short exchange? I did not use the DE pro sign. I did not use the AR pro sign. I did use an R for Roger, and I did give a signal report. But in these short exchanges, such as a DX contact or a contest contact, I suggest you avoid most of the pro signs unless they're necessary. So I sent him a Roger 5NN. He sends back a TU, and then he sends QRZ and his call sign. He's ready to go for the next station. Here's a contest exchange, very similar. Short again, CQ test, K1BT, W5LZ, W5LZ, 5NN, VT, if it's the state, or 327 if it's a serial number, or if it's a state QSO party, X6 County, although he wouldn't send it that way, he would send the abbreviation if it was the state QSO party, so he'd send ESS. So you need to know what the abbreviations are if you're working a state QSO party for each county. They're typically 3 or 4 letters. Or he might, if it was field day, he might send 5 Alpha Vermont, etc., etc. So the other station responds with a 5NN, and they send their state or their serial number. In this case, he's sending a number 1. He wants to make sure the station, maybe the contest has been going on for 40 hours and everyone's up in the hundreds or thousands, and he wants them to know that he's simply 1. So instead of just simply sending 1 and another station thinking maybe they'll miss the character, he sends 001 TT1. You might want to do this late in the contest if you're just jumping in, make 1 serial and everyone's up in the hundreds or thousands. That avoids him asking again for you to repeat the rest of the serial number because he thought he missed part of it. Again, Harrison County, but you wouldn't send it that way. You'd send the HAR or 2 Bravo, Texas, etc. A TU, a QRZ, and he's off to the races again. So this part is all variable depending on what the exchange is. The rest of it's very similar to the DX contact we made earlier. On contesting and DXing exchange, some additional tips. The only signal report should either be 5NN or something that's just taken effect that became popular in the last 2 years. That's ENNN, where they're sending the 5 shortcut number as E. I've been seeing more and more of that in the last 2 years. It really wasn't around before, but now I'm seeing that also. Drop most, if not all, pro signs and pro sign-like abbreviations. It's not necessary to use DE, it's not necessary to use AR, it's not necessary to use K, it's not necessary to use KN. You're going to have some people that complain that that's not the way to do it. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, that's the way to do it for a DX or CW contact, for DX or contest contact, because they don't want you wasting extra time. Some useful pro signs are, and abbreviations are NIL for not in the log. That means they did not successfully copy you. Before means they think you're a dupe. AGN for repeat something. RR for confirm something. QRL means they're asking if the frequency is in use. So these are still very effective to use. These are not necessary. That is a personal opinion, but you'll also find that that's the opinion of most people that contest. So this little chart is very important, especially when you're starting out, because you want to know whether they got the information and you're successful. Maybe you're having a hard time copying them because you're new. You have 20 minutes to copy their call sign because they're sending it over and over again, which is great. Now you want to make sure they got the exchange so that you know that they finished the contact. Now this this chart is a little complex because it has both phone and CW in it, but we're only talking about CW today. So a question mark means they need more information. A call with a question mark means they didn't get your call. Again, repeat. NR with a question mark means they're missing a number. They might also do any part of the exchange before or dupe, although you're going to see before much more common than dupe in CW. Neil, not in the log. Later or sorry, SRI. If they did get you a simple TU, a Roger, or Roger, QSL, 73, okay, yes, any affirmative. Most you're not going to get that on phone, but you're going to get these things on CW. Unfortunately, not everyone takes the time to do that. But if everything has been going very smoothly and they simply end by giving their call, giving a CQ or a QRZ in their call sign, let's assume they got everything and they're moving on. Number 5, here's an example of a POTA contact. CQ POTA, K1BT, W5LZ, W5LZ, 5NN, US 554, Downer State Forest. Now in CW, they're probably not going to send the Downer State Forest. They're probably just going to send the US 5544. I did a simple Roger and a 59. Most POTA people like to know what state you're in, so he sent Texas, and that's great, and we went on. I want to tell you something else about POTA if you did not realize. A POTA operation is still valid even if they never send you the park number. A POTA operation is even valid if they never tell you it's a POTA operation. So a lot of times I'll go out during the CWT contest on Wednesdays and operate POTA, and I won't tell anyone I'm operating POTA. They'll find out when they get the confirmation for my contact if they're interested in it. But I don't waste time because I know they're more interested in the contest. But I want to make sure I get my 10 contacts for a POTA contest real quick. So I know if I go out with my 5 watts and my little dinky antenna, I will be sure to get my 5 and my 10 contacts probably in the first 15 minutes during the contest. So that's perfectly acceptable to do that. Here's a short and a rag chew. So we now notice we got CQ, we got this. Now, notice what he's doing here. He's using a pro sign. When you're doing rag chewing and long conversations or short conversations, it's perfectly acceptable and proper to use the pro signs. They help the thing move along a lot better. So this is a lot more verbose and it can get even longer. Now, ending a short or longer QSO, you'll see something like TU. Remember, FUR means for. Fine business QSO sends a break, sends your call sign a DE, his call sign. You respond with whatever you want to say. Frank, great chat. Break, please QSL via LOTW to confirm Chittenden County. Hope to see you again, hopefully on 160 over the winter. Break 73 K1BT DE W5LZ SK final transmission, and he starts calling CQ and he's off to running again. He might have thrown a 73 in here. I didn't do that, but he certainly could have. And what he might also do is when you send this, he might come back with a shave and a haircut and you send him 2 dits. It's just a way to know that everything is all done, and you'll see that a lot in short conversations. So there'll be that little shave and a haircut, and then dit. That's what you send. Here's some full scripts on CW contacts. So if you're not sure what you're going to send, if you have it all written out here, it makes it a lot easier. When you get into a CW contact and you're not that familiar with CW, it's a lot easier if you have a script that tells you what to do. And even the most competent CW operator will sometimes forget things, so it's much easier to glance over on the sheet and you can keep on going. So have things like all of your membership numbers. So I have my QRP ARCI number, my AMSAT number, my GQRP club, etc. numbers, so I have them all handy right there on that little sheet. So these are all information that's available from the Long Island CW group, and you can also create your own. And on this create your own scripts, I thought I had a link here. Maybe I don't have it. No, I don't. Also finding a station, a balance of calling CQ and not calling CQ. So sometimes you might want to call CQ when there's no one else calling it. First, choose a band that's available to you, send a QRL, listen for a while, maybe even send another QRL. If no one comes back, then start calling CQ and make sure you give your call sign. Types of CQ that you can call, you can just give a CQ, anyone can respond, that's a general non-specific, or you can give a contest CQ, requesting contacts in a contest. Quite often, you'll see something like this, CQ OHQP for Ohio QSO Party or CQ Test. Or you can give a specific CQ like CQDX, CQ Ohio, CQ Pacific, CQ6 Call District, etc., etc. I suggest you do not use QRP when you're answering stations, but there's nothing wrong with calling CQ QRP if you want QRP stations to come back to you. And I won't go into the whole adding QRP to your call or not. I have a whole talk on that I'll give at RATPAC in the future, but just I don't give QRP in my responses unless someone asks specifically. Okay, just like I said in the phone contact section, how do you make more contacts? Well, you get on the air when the bands are busy, and you get on the bands often. When are the bands busy? Contests and weekends. Fortunately, there are 3 mini CW contests through the middle of the week. Matter of fact, on Wednesdays, there are 4 versions of the CW Ops group. They're each 1 hour long. There's one in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the evening, and one late at night. Actually, the next day, GMT. You can both answer CQs and call CQ, practice making contacts, use computer basic logging software that will help move things along. Here's some amateur radio online resources that can be helpful. Here's an introduction to HF and VHF for beginners. This is a RATPAC thing that I did with Marty Wall and with Dennis Kidder. Click on this link. It'll bring you out to both of these series. Please share this with your friends that are new if you teach classes. This is a great way. There's about 5+ hours of recordings for both of these for beginners activities. If you're interested in contesting, I have a slideshow and a video recording of my introduction to contesting that I did for RATPAC. There's also a class that I wrote for the ARRL, but you do need to be a member to take the ARRL Intro to Contesting, and there's also a book from the ARRL on contesting. Software, I have a whole presentation on logging software for both general and contesting, and again, there's a video of that from when I presented it. Successful operating tells you a lot of ways that you can check your signal by using things like reverse beacon network to listen for you, online software defined radios. So this is to help to make sure people are actually hearing you. Because if you're sending CQ all the time and no one is answering, there's one of 2 things happening. Either no one likes you or your radio is not working. So we're going to rule out that no one likes you by going on and listening to inanimate objects such as reverse beacon network, which is forced to listen to you even if they don't like you. So how to listen on HF? There's no license. There's no license required. You can buy an HF receiver and start listening. You can use a general coverage receiver. You can buy an SDR dongle. And one of the great things is online software-defined radios. I have a whole presentation on it, but if you click on this bottom link, it's a short 4-page thing that I use with students when I'm working with school-age students. And this basically tells you how you can get on the air and use these internet sites that have tunable online software-defined radios. I have some examples of what they look like and how to tune them. I also have information on 2 different types of interfaces, some additional sites here, but I also have information on frequency charts, shortwave listening, some of the DX Summit things so you can find stations to go look for, and then I also have a guide to the amateur radio bands. So that's available at the second link, tiny.cc free RX. And this, by the way, is my grandson Holden using a software-defined online software-defined receiver on his phone. Tonight was all about CW, but if you're interested in digital or single sideband, I have a very similar talk on both of these, and they are both available for you to take a look at. So that's the end. I'll be happy to take questions and comments. Again, To get to the slideshow, tiny.cc/CWQSO, or you can shoot the QR code, and I'll leave that up there for a while. So we'll go ahead and take questions and comments. First we'll cover the chat, and then we'll go ahead and take questions. If you put your hand up, we'll acknowledge you and ask you to ask your question. So I see a couple things in chat here. Let's see what we got. ICOM 7300 does not require an interface between the computer's software, keyboard, and radio. The best example is CW Type. Now that's using that is using a program. What I'm referring to things where you can actually hook the keyboard directly up to the radio. You can do it with software also, and that's what I was talking about when I mentioned the logging software. I didn't talk about the CW specific programs, but they work the same as the logging software. So that's the difference I want to say. CW Type works great. There's other programs that do it too, but what I was talking about is radios that actually have a port that you can plug a keyboard into without any other software or computer. Since my call sign ends in a BE, sometimes folks think my call sign is N8S. Yes, if your call sign can be broken, and I have a whole presentation on that. If you go back through the RATPACs and you look at the presentation on ideal call signs, I talk about which letters are problematic for both CW and for phone. And if you're thinking about getting a new call sign, you may want to look at that before you do it, because you'll find out that there are some things that are just going to be problematic, and you may not want to have them for your call sign. Okay, so other questions? Anyone? Go ahead, raise your hand or unmute. We don't have that many people, so just go ahead and unmute, and we'll take any questions or comments. I think I heard someone. Any questions, comments? Everyone's going to be shy. You can send it. Yes.
Anthony, very good presentation. Thank you very much. I love your resources that you have in the presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, you're very welcome, Dan. Thanks. Thank you for the comment.
Good job as always.
Oh, thanks, Frank.
Yeah, Anthony, this is Steve Waterman.
Yes.
I thought that was an excellent presentation, just excellent. And the reason why I brought CW Type in here is that it can multitask. In other words, it has a huge buffer. You could type into it, add your extra spacing, use it for code practice. You can cut and paste text from anything. And it also it does have a transistor switch interface for the older radios, but with a radio like 7300, you just plug USB to USB and it works perfectly. It can also use a keyer if you want to connect the keyer up to it, but that would sort of be redundant because most radios now have keyers in them. So this would be an excellent tool for somebody learning Morse code, where they might have an idea of what's going to be said and then listen to it on the radio. And another thing that the last thing I want to emphasize is that another great way to learn how to read CW is send it.
Yes.
Every stop sign you see when you're driving, everything. Okay, thank you, sir.
Oh, well, thank you. And you're much more an expert than I am also. So this is the fun with Morse, and this has a bunch more information about a bunch of different software for sending and a bunch of things in here about making QSOs. So if you're interested, take a look at the fun with CW. A little bit of it's redundant, but there's a lot of stuff here on software for learning purposes, both software and apps. There's information on sending CW in here way beyond what we were talking about. These are all programs that are decoder programs, and some of them also have sending capabilities. So FLDigi can send also. These can interface with N1MM. So there's a bunch of information in here talking about, in this particular radio, as I mentioned earlier, the Jupiter, you can plug a PS2 keyboard into and be able to type CD CW directly from that keyboard without anything else. So take a look at this if you're interested. It's fun with Morse code. Tiny.c FWM will get you to that. Other questions or comments?
There's also some groups that have they broadcast CW practice over the air, so you can learn to practice listening to actual text going over the air. Like ARRL has the CW code practice at different speeds. And other groups that do it.
Then the ARRL actually transmits information from the magazines, and they'll tell you what issue it's from, so you can actually go back and check your copy later on. If you go to the ARRL site and you look for the code practice, you'll find that information, and it changes during the different seasons of the year, and they're on different bands. But if you just go in and say code practice, I'm pretty sure it gives you the schedule. The W1, you want the W1AW operating schedule, and it shows you right here, fast code, slow code, the times a day, and what they're sending, whether they're sending the code bulletin or they're sending practice. Thank you, Barry. Anything else? Anyone? Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.